China says it has completed military drills around Taiwan, but it warned that more could follow. Beijing sees democratically ruled Taiwan as part of its territory and says that any push towards independence would prompt action. Taiwan's president, elected last May, has used more direct wording in stating the archipelago's independence and said the military drills were a clear provocation. Well, to get a better understanding of the situation and where things may go from here, we can cross over to NATO Defence College Senior Non-Resident Associate Fellow, Mr. Thomas Withington. Mr. Withington, thanks so much for your time and being with us here on France 24. Can I start by asking you, these latest military games, as they are called, it's the fourth time in quite a short period. It seems to be the biggest one yet. You know, what are you reading into that? How significant?
I think it is significant because what we're seeing is the ongoing deep tensions that are existing in that part of the Asia-Pacific region at present. As you mentioned, you know, as you had in your introduction just now, tensions between China and Taiwan remain high, chiefly because Beijing regards Taiwan as a sort of renegade province that it seeks to incorporate into mainland China. We've also got the backdrop of the US presidential election that's ongoing at the moment. So I think the posturing is not accidental. I mean, it's driven really by two things, which is this tension that exists with China over Taiwan, but also the wider strategic issue of the US election and US-China relations as well. So it's not surprising the regularity we've seen these drills, the size of them, and I expect that to continue in the coming months and coming years.
Can you give me a better idea of this international involvement? I mean, we are reading today that, you know, Chinese and Russian military men are meeting to discuss greater cooperation on that front.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things that you've seen since the second invasion of Ukraine in February 2022 is a gradual but steady convergence between Russia and China over what they consider their main strategic challenges. And that key strategic challenge at the moment is their own perceptions of US and US-led power and the place of the United States and her allies within the sort of wider global geostrategic picture. So there's a chiming of interest. And on top of that, you're also seeing sort of North Korea and Iran enter that equation as well. You've got four seemingly quite diverse nations, if you like, quite diverse political systems to an extent, but which have this sort of common concern about US power. And this is how these concerns manifest themselves, is in exercises like the kind we've seen recently.
Also, when you look at the war in Ukraine, you know, Russia, a bigger country invading Ukraine, some people are saying there could be similarities in how China now looks at Taiwan with that conflict.
You make a very good point, Eva. I mean, the whole question of Ukraine and how that relates to China and Taiwan is very interesting because on one hand, Russia sees Ukraine almost as this sort of renegade province that it wants to reincorporate into a kind of reconstructed Soviet Union. And here we have a similar sort of situation regarding China and Taiwan. But I think one of the things that's important to realize with the Taiwan situation is that the Chinese military have also seen how difficult Ukraine has been for Russia. Now, on paper, given the Russian military strength, Ukraine should have been a relatively easy area to invade and occupy and then retain. What we're seeing is that that's not been the case at all for Russia. And I'm sure that the Chinese military equally have similar concerns, not least of which any invasion would need to go across the sea and through the air, which complicates matters hugely. So on one hand, you've got this situation where perhaps the leadership in Beijing are thinking, well, Russia has been strategically assertive, it's challenged Western power. But equally, on the other hand, they've seen how difficult that war continues to be for Russia. And that's something, obviously, that the Chinese military need to factor into their thinking regarding any future military operation to invade and occupy Taiwan.
Now, we have seen the new president of Taiwan, well, new elected a few months ago. He's been much more direct in terms of his speech of the position of Taiwan as an independent nation. Militarily, though, where does Taiwan stand?
The Taiwanese do have a very strong military. I mean, the thing is that they've received American material for many, many years. They are currently modernizing their military quite considerably. They're looking at, again, at things like length of military service terms, that kind of thing. Your film just now was showing, I think, some quite advanced Taiwanese military equipment there. And Taiwan is not going to be an easy area to occupy. No country is easy to occupy, but the Chinese have got to get across the Taiwan Strait, and they've got to then land in Taiwan, and they've got to seize kind of key operational and strategic targets, that kind of thing. It's a lot harder than it sounds, and the Taiwanese military would put up a very good fight. And on top of that, there is this kind of pledge from Washington to defend Taiwan, or certainly not to. I think it's a euphemistic term about not changing the status quo of Taiwan as an island, which does hint at US military involvement. And we've seen that in the 1990s. Bill Clinton, when he was president, sent US warships into the Taiwan Strait, into areas around Taiwan, when tensions between Beijing and Taipei were degrading. So the Taiwanese military should not be taken lightly, and would prove to be, I think, quite a worthy adversary for the People's Liberation Army.
Finally, Mr. Withington, we have seen China already put sanctions on a number of businessmen in Taiwan, notably the founder of a company that makes the microchips. Do you think the rising tensions, if they are that, could have already a global impact?
This is a perennial concern. I mean, as you've mentioned in your question just now, we've got a huge number of semiconductors, microchips, that are manufactured in Taiwan. That is a choke point in the global supply chain of these vital components that we simply cannot live our lives without. So there is a huge concern about the strategic ramifications. I mean, any military operation, any war between Taiwan and China would be absolutely devastating for the region and for the wider world. I mean, the sea lines of communication that goes through these areas are very, very significant as well. So I think, to be fair, all sides are cognizant of that. And I think, to be fair, are trying to avoid it. But it does illustrate how serious these tensions are and how serious things could get if, heavens forbid, something goes wrong.
Mr. Thomas Withington of the NATO Defence College, thanks so much for your time and indeed your analysis on that situation. Much appreciated.